He left his pregnant wife for another woman years later. He begged her for a kidney. She thought the pain of betrayal was behind her until the man who shattered her life showed up at her door, weak, desperate, and out of options. For decades, she raised their child alone, with nothing but courage and faith. And now the very man who abandoned her is asking for the one thing only she can give. But as buried wounds reopen, shocking truths rise to the surface, and a choice that could save his life might also break her all over again. Will she turn away the man who destroyed her, or find the strength to forgive the unforgivable? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Grace danced between the stove and counter, one hand resting on her swollen belly as she stirred the beef stew. 7 months along now, and she'd finally found her rhythm despite the extra weight she carried. The small kitchen smelled of herbs and fresh-baked bread, a perfect antidote to the February chill that pressed against the windows. "Just a few more minutes," she whispered to her unborn child. "Daddy will be home soon." She'd made Daniel's favorite meal tonight. Things had been strained between them lately, his long hours at work, his distracted silences, the way he seemed to look through her rather than at her. But tonight would be different. Tonight, they would reconnect. Grace set the small dining table with care, adding a candle and a vase with the season's first daffodils she'd splurged on at the grocery store. Their wedding photo smiled at her from the sideboard, Daniel handsome in his suit, her face radiant with happiness. 3 years ago, they'd promised forever. Now, with their baby coming, that promise felt more sacred than ever. The clock ticked past 6. Then 6:30. Grace lowered the heat on the stew and sat at the table, rubbing her back. The baby kicked, a reassuring flutter. "Your daddy works too hard," she told her belly, "but he's doing it for us." By 7, she'd called his office. No answer. She texted him, trying to keep worry from her tone. "Dinner's ready whenever you are. Love you." At 8, the stew had thickened too much. She turned off the stove. The sound of a key in the lock startled her at 9:15. Grace pushed herself up from the couch, relief washing through her body. "Daniel, I was getting worried." She moved toward him for a kiss, but he stepped back. His face looked wrong, pale, determined, with dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't loosened his tie, hadn't set down his briefcase. He stood just inside the door like a visitor who didn't plan to stay. "I need to talk to you," he said. Grace's hand instinctively went to her belly. "Is everything okay? Are you sick?" He walked past her to the living room, still in his coat. The distance he put between them felt deliberate, calculated. "I can't do this anymore, Grace." The room tilted slightly. "Do what?" "This." His gesture encompassed the house, her, everything. Us, the baby, all of it. Grace lowered herself onto the arm of the couch. "You're just stressed about becoming a father. That's normal. I'm leaving you." 4 words. Simple. Devastating. Final. "What do you mean, leaving?" Her voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. Daniel looked at the floor, the wall, anywhere but at her face. "I've met someone. At work. It's been going on for a few months now." The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her distress. Grace pressed her hands against her middle, trying to shield her child from what was happening. "You're having an affair?" The words tasted bitter. "Melanie understands me. We connect in ways that you and I never did." Grace stared at him, this stranger wearing her husband's face. "I'm carrying your child." "I know." He finally looked at her, his expression a mixture of guilt and impatience. "I'm sorry about the timing, but staying would be worse for everyone." "Worse than abandoning your pregnant wife?" Her voice cracked. Daniel picked up the briefcase he'd just set down. "I'll come by for my things tomorrow while you're at work. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce." Divorce. The word echoed in the room they'd painted together, under the roof they'd chosen to shelter their family. "Daniel, please." But he was already walking toward the door, his back straight, steps quick, as if he couldn't escape fast enough. The door closed behind him with a soft click, sealing off the life they'd planned together and leaving Grace alone with the cooling stew, the melting candle, and the child that would now have no father. Gray morning light seeped through the curtains Grace hadn't closed the night before. She blinked at the ceiling, momentarily confused by the stiffness in her neck and the ache in her lower back. Then reality crashed down. She'd cried herself to sleep on the couch, unable to face their empty bed. The toast she'd made in a daze sat untouched on the coffee table. The butter congealed into pale yellow pools. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from work. She should call back, explain. But what would she say? My husband traded me in for a newer model? The doorbell rang, startling her. For one wild moment, hope flared. Maybe Daniel had changed his mind. Maybe last night was just a nightmare. But when she opened the door, her parents stood on the threshold. Her mother's face crumpled at the sight of Grace's swollen eyes and rumpled clothes. "Oh, sweetheart." Mom enveloped her in a hug that smelled of lavender and home. Dad stood behind, his weathered face tight with worry. "We came as soon as we got your call." Had she called them? Grace vaguely remembered sobbing into the phone sometime during the endless night. They guided her back to the couch. Mom's arm remained firm around her shoulders while Dad disappeared into the kitchen. The sound of running water and cupboard doors opening filled the silence Grace couldn't break. "He's making tea," Mom said gently. "Now tell me everything." Grace stared at her hands. "Daniel's gone. He's been seeing someone else." The words felt foreign on her tongue. "He's filing for divorce." Her mother's grip tightened. "That worthless—" She stopped herself, took a deep breath. "I'm so sorry, Grace." Dad returned with 3 steaming mugs. "I always thought that boy had a weak character." He set the tea down with more force than necessary. "No real man abandons his family." "Robert," Mom warned. "Well, it's true, Helen. Our daughter is 7 months pregnant, for heaven's sake." Grace flinched. "Please don't." "Don't what, honey?" Her mother's voice softened. "Don't talk about him like that." Even now, she couldn't bear to hear Daniel criticized. "It won't help." Dad sat heavily in the armchair across from them. "What do you need, Gracie? You'll move back home with us, of course." "No." The word came out stronger than she expected. "I'm staying here." Her parents exchanged worried glances. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be alone right now," Mom said. Grace placed both hands on her swollen belly. "I'm not alone. But the mortgage, the bills, how will you manage?" Dad leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. "I don't know yet, but I will." She met her father's concerned gaze. "I have my job. I have savings. I'll figure it out." Her mother brushed a strand of hair from Grace's face. "You don't have to be so strong all the time." But she did. For the tiny life depending on her, she had to be stronger than she'd ever been. Her parents stayed through the morning. Mom made soup Grace couldn't eat. Dad fixed the leaky faucet Daniel had been promising to repair for months. They spoke of practical things, lawyers, child support, health insurance, while Grace nodded automatically, the words washing over her like distant waves. When they finally left, after extracting a promise that she would call if she needed anything, Grace locked the door behind them and pressed her forehead against the cool wood. In the sudden quiet, she placed both hands on her belly, feeling the gentle movements within. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered. "I don't know exactly how, but we're going to be okay. I promise." Her voice grew firmer. "We don't need him. We will survive this." The baby kicked against her palm, as if in agreement. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright, mocking Grace's dark mood. She hesitated by her car, keys clutched in her trembling hand. The thought of facing her church family, their questions, their pity made her stomach clench. But where else could she turn? The familiar white steeple of First Community Church rose against the blue sky as Grace pulled into the parking lot. She'd attended services here since childhood, had married Daniel at that very altar. Now she returned alone, her wedding ring a mocking weight on her finger. "Grace!" Mrs. Patterson spotted her the moment she slipped through the door. The elderly woman's eyes widened at Grace's appearance, hair hastily pulled back, face bare of makeup, yesterday's loose dress barely concealing her pregnancy. "We missed you at the women's group Thursday." "I've been." Grace's voice cracked. "Things have been difficult." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. She took Grace's arm and guided her to a pew near the back. "Sit here, dear. I'll get Pastor John." Grace sank onto the wooden bench, grateful for the semi-privacy as the congregation bustled around her. Several people nodded in her direction, but something in her face must have warned them away. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. "Grace." She looked up into Pastor John's kind eyes. He'd officiated her wedding 5 years ago, his voice strong and confident as he pronounced them husband and wife. Now he spoke her name with such compassion that tears immediately sprang to her eyes. "He left me," she whispered. "Daniel's gone." Pastor John sat beside her, his weathered Bible resting between them. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do." The admission cost her, pride crumbling under the weight of her fear. "You don't have to know right now." He covered her hand with his. "And you certainly don't have to face this alone." The organist began to play, signaling the start of service. Grace wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. "I should find a seat." "Stay right here," Pastor John said firmly. "This is exactly where you belong." The service passed in a blur of hymns and scripture readings. When the pastor asked if anyone needed special prayer, Grace found herself standing, though she had no memory of the decision to do so. One by one, members of the congregation moved to surround her. Mrs. Patterson's gnarled hand gripped hers. "Mr. Collins, who'd lost his wife last spring, placed a steadying palm on her shoulder. The teenage Martin twins, usually so boisterous, stood solemn and tall behind her. "Father," Pastor John prayed, his voice carrying through the hushed sanctuary, "we lift up our sister Grace in her time of need. Wrap your arms around her and her child. Show her your unfailing love when human love has faltered. Give her strength for each new day, wisdom for each decision, and the constant assurance that she is never alone." "Amen," the congregation echoed. "We're here for you," Mrs. Patterson whispered. "Whatever you need." "My Frank can help with baby furniture," offered Mrs. Reynolds. "I can drive you to doctor appointments," said Emily from the choir. Grace looked around the circle of familiar faces, seeing not pity, but determination. These people her church family would not abandon her. That night, Grace sat cross-legged on her bed, a journal open on her lap. The pen hovered over the blank page before she began to write. "Today I remembered I am not alone. My baby and I have people who care about us. Daniel may have walked away, but God hasn't, and neither will I. I promise you this, my little one. You will be loved. You will be cherished. Your father's choices won't define your life or limit your happiness. Together, we will build something beautiful from these broken pieces. Tomorrow is a new day, and we will face it with courage." Grace closed the journal and placed her hand on her belly, feeling a renewed sense of purpose stirring within her, as strong and persistent as the tiny kicks beneath her palm. Grace jerked awake, a sharp pain slicing through her lower back. She fumbled for the bedside lamp, squinting at the clock. 2:17 a.m. Another contraction gripped her, this one stronger than the last. She counted the minutes since the previous one just 8 minutes apart. "It's time," she whispered to herself, reaching for the phone with trembling hands. Her mother answered on the second ring, voice instantly alert despite the hour. "Grace, is it happening? Can you and Dad come? The contractions are getting closer. We're on our way. Don't move." Grace eased herself out of bed, one hand supporting her belly as she waddled to the overnight bag she'd packed weeks ago. Another contraction hit, forcing her to lean against the wall, breathing through clenched teeth. This wasn't how she'd imagined this night. Daniel should have been here, pacing nervously, timing contractions, whispering encouragements. Instead, her parents' car pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later, her father's face tight with concern as he helped her down the front steps. "You're doing great, sweetheart," her mother murmured from the back seat, where she sat holding Grace's hand. "Just breathe through it." The hospital corridor seemed endless. A nurse took one look at Grace's face and grabbed a wheelchair. "First baby?" she asked kindly. Grace nodded, unable to speak as another contraction ripped through her. "She's 7 centimeters already," the doctor announced after examining her. "This little one's in a hurry to meet you." The delivery room buzzed with activity monitors beeping, nurses checking vitals, her mother wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. Grace felt untethered, drifting on waves of pain. "I can't do this," she gasped after a particularly brutal contraction. Her mother leaned close. "Yes, you can. You're the strongest woman I know. Your baby needs you to be brave for just a little longer." Grace focused on that, thought her baby needed her. This child who would have only one parent present in their life. This innocent little one who hadn't asked for any of this. "I see the head," the doctor called out. "Give me one more big push, Grace." She gathered every ounce of strength, every shred of determination. With a primal cry that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her, Grace pushed. A sudden, slippery release, and then the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. Her baby's first angry wail. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Grace's chest. A healthy baby boy. The world narrowed to this moment, this miracle. His tiny face was scrunched in protest, dark hair plastered to his head, little fists waving in indignation, perfect in every way. "Hello, Ethan," Grace whispered, the name she'd chosen weeks ago finally finding its owner. "I'm your mommy." Tears streamed down her face, joy and grief impossibly tangled together. Joy for this precious life she now held. Grief for the family that should have been. Her mother squeezed her shoulder. "He's beautiful, Grace." "He looks like you," her father added gruffly from the foot of the bed, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Grace traced Ethan's miniature features with a gentle finger. His crying had subsided now that he was nestled against her heart, his eyes blinking up at her with unfocused wonder. "I promise you'll never doubt how much you're loved," she murmured, pressing her lips to his forehead. "We're going to have a good life, you and me. Different than I planned, but wonderful all the same." Ethan's tiny hand wrapped around her finger with surprising strength, as if sealing their pact. In that grip, Grace felt something new bloom within her chest, a fierce, protective love that would carry them both forward. Grace jolted awake to Ethan's hungry cries, the thin wail cutting through her dreamless sleep. She blinked at the bedside clock. 3:17 a.m. Again. Her son seemed to have an internal alarm set for this exact minute every night. "Coming, sweet boy," she murmured, shuffling across the hall to the nursery. Ethan's cries turned to whimpers as Grace lifted him from the crib. His tiny body curled against her chest, seeking warmth and comfort. In the soft glow of the nightlight, she settled into the rocking chair her father had refinished as a gift when Ethan was born. "There now," she whispered, adjusting her nightgown. Ethan latched on eagerly, his eyes drifting closed as he nursed. Grace stroked his silky head, marveling at how someone so small could command her entire world. The exhaustion weighed on her like a physical thing, her body still healing, her mind foggy from broken sleep. Yet these quiet moments in the darkness held a sweetness she'd never known before. Morning came too soon. Grace moved through her new routine in a daze, changing Ethan. Brewing coffee she'd reheat 3 times before finishing, folding tiny onesies that multiplied like rabbits in the laundry basket. Her mother called around noon. "How's my grandson today?" "Perfect," Grace answered, watching Ethan sleep in his bouncer. Loud, demanding, completely unreasonable about his schedule, but perfect. "And how are you, really?" Grace sighed. "Tired. Scared sometimes. But okay. I can come over this afternoon if you want to take a proper shower. One that lasts longer than 3 minutes." "That sounds like heaven." After hanging up, Grace bent to kiss Ethan's forehead. "Your grandma thinks I need to wash my hair." The nerve. Ethan's face scrunched in sleep, his rosebud mouth working as if practicing smiles. These tiny expressions kept Grace going through the hardest days, the promise of who he was becoming. The mail slot clattered that afternoon while her mother rocked Ethan. Grace gathered the scattered envelopes from the floor bills, a baby formula coupon, and a thick manila envelope bearing a law firm's return address. Her heart sank. "What is it?" her mother asked, noticing Grace's expression. "Nothing that can't wait." Grace placed the envelope on the counter, face down. But after her mother left, after Ethan's evening feeding and bath, after she'd laid him in his crib for his first stretch of night sleep, Grace couldn't avoid it any longer. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The divorce petition was coldly official, full of legal language that reduced their 8 years together to irreconcilable differences. Daniel's signature slashed across the bottom line, bold, final, without hesitation. Grace sat at the kitchen table, documents spread before her, a strange calm settling over her. She'd expected pain, rage, fresh grief. Instead, she felt only a quiet certainty. This paper changed nothing that hadn't already been changed the night Daniel walked out. Ethan's monitor lit up with soft fussing sounds. Grace gathered the documents and slid them back into the envelope, tucking it under a cookbook where it could wait. In the nursery, Ethan blinked up at her, not quite crying but clearly wanting company. Grace lifted him, breathing in his sweet baby scent. "Just you and me against the world, little man," she whispered, settling into the rocking chair. "And that's more than enough." As Ethan's eyes grew heavy, Grace hummed a lullaby her own mother had sung to her. Outside, rain began to fall, a gentle rhythm against the window. Grace rocked, watching her son's peaceful face, choosing this moment, this love, over everything else. Grace tied the last blue balloon to the mailbox and stepped back to admire her handiwork. Streamers fluttered from the porch railing, and a hand-painted banner, "Happy 1st Birthday, Ethan," stretched across the front of the house. Nothing fancy, but filled with love. "The cake looks wonderful," her mother called from the porch, where she arranged paper plates and cups on a folding table covered with a cheerful checkered cloth. "I still can't believe he's won already." Grace shook her head, remembering the tiny bundle that once fit in the crook of her arm. Now Ethan wobbled around on determined legs, babbling a language only he understood. Her father emerged from the house with Ethan on his hip, the birthday boy sporting overalls and a crown made of construction paper. "There's the man of the hour." Grace clapped her hands, and Ethan responded with his signature toothy grin, 4 teeth on top, 2 on the bottom. Neighbors began arriving with wrapped packages and covered dishes. Mrs. Henderson from across the street brought her famous potato salad. The Millers came with their twins, who were just a few months older than Ethan. Pastor Jim and his wife arrived with a wooden toy train. Ethan soaked up the attention, high-fiving guests and showing off his newest trick, a wobbly bow that made everyone laugh. Grace watched him, her heart so full it ached. They had made it through the hardest year of her life, and here was her reward. Her son, healthy and happy, surrounded by people who cherished him. "Time for cake," her mother announced, carrying out the small round cake with a single candle. Everyone gathered around the picnic table, singing, while Ethan stared wide-eyed at the flame. "Make a wish, sweet boy," Grace whispered, helping him lean forward. Together they blew out the candle, and cheers erupted across the yard. That's when she felt a shift in the air, a sudden tightness in her chest. Grace looked up to see Daniel standing at the edge of the yard, one hand holding the gate, the other clasping the fingers of a slender blonde woman. The conversation around Grace faded to a dull roar. Daniel looked good-tailored shirt, expensive watch, hair freshly cut. The woman beside him wore a sundress that probably cost more than Grace's monthly grocery budget. A diamond flashed on her left hand. "Who invited them?" her father muttered, moving protectively closer to Grace. "Nobody," Grace whispered back, her mouth dry. Daniel didn't enter the yard. He simply stood watching, a strange half-smile on his face as his eyes took in the modest celebration. The small house, the used toys scattered on the grass. The woman leaned in to whisper something, and Daniel nodded, squeezing her hand. Grace fought the urge to grab Ethan and hide inside. Instead, she lifted her chin and walked toward the gate. "Daniel," she said simply. "Grace." His voice was casual, as if they'd bumped into each other at the grocery store. "This is Rachel, my wife." The word stung more than Grace expected. "Congratulations," Grace managed. "Did you want to see Ethan?" Something flickered across Daniel's face, hesitation, perhaps guilt before his expression hardened. "Just passing by. Thought I'd see how things were." The unspoken assessment hung in the air. Small. Humble. Not what he'd chosen. "We're doing well," Grace said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Very well." Daniel nodded, eyes lingering on the celebration behind her. "Good. That's good." He turned away without another word, Rachel's heels clicking on the sidewalk as they departed. Grace stood frozen, watching them disappear down the street, feeling as if a cold wind had blown through the warm summer day. After tucking Ethan into his crib, Grace slipped into her bedroom and closed the door. The smile she'd maintained throughout the remainder of the party crumbled. She sank onto the edge of her bed, shoulders shaking as silent tears streamed down her face. Daniel's appearance had blindsided her, not just his presence, but how it made her feel small, insufficient, discarded. The woman beside him had been everything Grace wasn't: polished, sophisticated, childless, free. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Her mother entered without waiting for a response, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "I thought you might need this," she said, settling beside Grace on the bed. "Your father's cleaning up the last of the party mess." Grace accepted the warm mug, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "I'm sorry. I should be helping." "Nonsense. You've been strong all day." Her mother's weathered hand covered Grace's. "It's okay to break a little now." The permission was all Grace needed. Words tumbled out between fresh tears how Daniel had looked at their modest home with barely disguised contempt, how the diamond on his new wife's finger had glinted in the sunlight, how Grace had felt judged and found wanting. "I know it's silly," she hiccuped. "I don't even want him back." But seeing him so, unaffected, like we were just a chapter he closed without a second thought. Her mother listened, steady as always. When Grace finished, she simply asked, "Did you see Ethan's face when he smashed that cake?" The memory broke through Grace's misery. Ethan's wide-eyed wonder followed by absolute delight as he plunged both hands into the frosting. "That boy has more joy in his little finger than Daniel has in his whole body," her mother continued. "And he got that from you." The monitor on the nightstand crackled with Ethan's soft baby snores. Grace closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. "You're right," she whispered. "Of course I am." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Now drink your tea." Later, after her parents had gone home, Grace checked on Ethan one more time. Moonlight spilled through the nursery window, illuminating his peaceful face. One tiny hand clutched his favorite stuffed elephant. The other lay open, trusting and vulnerable. Grace gently traced his fingers, marveling at how someone so small could make her feel so strong. Ethan stirred, his eyelids fluttering. "Mama," he murmured sleepily. "I'm here, sweet boy." She leaned down to kiss his forehead. "I'll always be here." The words settled something inside her. Whatever Daniel thought of their life didn't matter. This moment, this love was real. It was enough. More than enough. A car engine rumbled outside. Grace moved to the window and parted the curtains. Daniel's expensive sedan idled at the curb, headlights cutting through the darkness. Had he been sitting there all this time, watching their home, regretting his choices? For a heartbeat, Grace wondered if he might come to the door, ask to hold his son just once. The car pulled away. Grace didn't feel disappointment, only certainty. Daniel had made his choice long ago. He'd chosen a different life, one that didn't include midnight feedings and birthday cakes smashed by tiny hands. "Goodbye, Daniel," she whispered to the retreating taillights. She turned back to her sleeping son, to the home they built together. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but Grace would face them without looking back, without measuring her worth against Daniel's absence. His shadow would not darken their door again. 20 years slipped by in a parade of school lunches, soccer games, and quiet Sunday morning. Grace marked the passage of time in Ethan's growth, his first day of kindergarten, middle school graduation, the college acceptance letter that made him whoop with joy around their kitchen. Now, at 48, Grace found contentment in the life she'd built. Her hair showed threads of silver and laugh lines framed her eyes, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew her worth. She hummed as she set the dining table for dinner, placing Ethan's favorite blue plates in his usual spot. He'd called earlier to say he'd stop by after work. At 21, he graduated with honors and landed a job at an engineering firm downtown. Pride bloomed in her chest whenever she thought of the man her son had become: thoughtful, ambitious, and kind, despite the absence that could have hardened him. Grace smoothed the hand over the tablecloth, remembering the toddler who once spilled juice across it, the teenager who'd done homework while she cooked. The house felt emptier since he'd moved into his own apartment, but these weekly dinners kept them connected. The timer on the oven chimed. She checked the lasagna, Ethan's favorite since childhood, and adjusted the temperature. Perfect timing. He'd arrived just as it finished baking. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Coming," Grace called, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. Probably Mrs. Peterson from next door, borrowing sugar again. She swung the door open, the welcoming smile freezing on her face. Daniel Whitman stood on her porch. The years had not been kind to him. His once broad shoulders hunched forward, his face gaunt and gray, deep lines carved into his forehead, around his mouth. His expensive clothes hung loosely on his frame. "Grace," he said, his voice a weathered version of the one that had once whispered promises, then shattered them. She gripped the doorframe, steadying herself. Daniel. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was he here to make amends? To ask about Ethan? 20 years of silence, and now this unexpected appearance? "I need to talk to you." His gaze darted past her, into the home he'd abandoned. "May I come in?" Grace hesitated. She'd imagined this moment countless times over the years, had rehearsed cutting words, righteous anger, but facing the reality of him diminished, almost fragile, those prepared speeches dissolved. "Please," his voice cracked. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important." She stepped aside, allowing him into the entryway. He moved slowly, each step deliberate. Something was wrong. "What is it, Daniel?" Her tone was neutral, neither warm nor cold. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I'm sick, Grace, really sick." He paused, gathering himself. "Kidney failure, both of them." Understanding dawned cold and clear. "Why come to me?" Daniel's eyes, once the same brilliant blue as Ethan's, were dulled with desperation. "My wife left years ago. My other children." He trailed off. "They want nothing to do with me." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken history. "I need a donor," he finally said. "The doctors say family members are the best match." Grace stared at him. This stranger who was once her husband, the man who had walked away when she needed him most. "You're asking me for a kidney?" The absurdity of it almost made her laugh. Or, Daniel looked around the house again at the photos of Ethan lining the walls. "I was hoping to meet my son." Grace's legs nearly gave way beneath her. She motioned toward the living room, unable to form words. Daniel followed, his steps faltering, the confident stride she remembered replaced by this halting shuffle. "How did you find us?" Grace finally asked, remaining standing while Daniel lowered himself onto the edge of the sofa. "I never completely lost track of you," he admitted, eyes downcast. "I just stayed away. Thought it was better that way." "Better for whom?" The words escaped before Grace could catch them. Daniel flinched. "I deserve that." The kitchen timer chimed again, startling them both. Grace welcomed the interruption, disappearing to silence it. She pressed her palms against the cool countertop, drawing deep breaths. "Lord, give me strength, not for him, for me." When she returned, Daniel had pulled a folded paper from his pocket medical records. She realized, as he unfolded them, with trembling fingers. "End-stage renal disease," he said, the clinical term sounding harsh in her warm living room. "Both kidneys. I've been on dialysis for 8 months, but it's not enough anymore." Grace sat across from him, keeping the coffee table between them like a barrier. "What about your new family?" The word tasted bitter. Marissa left me 12 years ago. His laugh held no humor. Turns out I wasn't any better at keeping my second wife than my first. And the children? 2 daughters. They're adults now. Daniel's gaze drifted to the photos on the mantel. Ethan's college graduation, his first car, the 2 of them on a hiking trip. They have their own lives, their own resentments. So, I'm what? Your last resort? Grace felt a surge of anger, hot and unexpected. I don't deserve your help, Daniel said, voice cracking. But I'm asking anyway. I'm desperate, Grace. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Daniel's labored breathing. The doctor says family members are the best potential donors, he continued. You or Ethan. Grace felt ice in her veins at the mention of her son's name. You've never even met him. I know. Daniel's shoulders slumped. That's my greatest regret. A car door slammed outside. Grace tensed, recognizing the sound of Ethan's arrival. Their weekly dinner, their sacred time together, was about to collide with this ghost from the past. You need to leave. Grace stood abruptly. Grace, please, not now, not like this. She moved toward the door. I need time to think. Ethan can't meet you this way, with no warning. Daniel struggled to his feet, his weakness evident in every movement. He pulled a business card from his wallet, placing it on the table. My number, the hospital information. His voice shook. I understand if you never call, but I'm running out of options, running out of time. Grace heard Ethan's footsteps on the porch. Go out the back, she said, gesturing toward the kitchen. I can't do this right now. Daniel paused at the kitchen doorway, turning back to look at her. For a moment, she saw a flash of the man she'd once loved before ambition and selfishness had consumed him. I'm sorry, Grace, for everything. The back door clicked shut just as Ethan's key turned in the front lock. Grace's hands trembled as she closed the door on Daniel's retreating figure, watching him disappear down the alley behind their home. The business card remained on her coffee table, an unwelcome invitation to a past she'd fought so hard to leave behind. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Grace poured coffee into 2 mugs. She'd barely slept, Daniel's haggard face haunting her dreams. Ethan sat at the counter, scrolling through his phone, unaware of the weight pressing on her heart. Ethan, I need to tell you something. Grace placed his mug before him, her hand unsteady. He looked up, concern immediately crossing his face. Mom, what's wrong? Grace took a deep breath. Your father came to see me yesterday. The mug froze halfway to Ethan's lips. My father? Here? He left before you arrived for dinner. Grace wrapped her fingers around her own mug, drawing warmth from it. He's sick, Ethan. Very sick. Ethan set his coffee down with a sharp click against the counter. And that's supposed to matter to us because? He needs a kidney transplant. Understanding dawned on Ethan's face, followed quickly by a darkening storm of anger. His jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. You've got to be kidding me. Ethan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. 20 years of nothing, not a birthday card, not a child support check, not even a phone call, and now he wants parts of our bodies? I know how it sounds. Do you? Ethan paced the kitchen, hands clenched at his sides. The man abandoned you when you were pregnant, left you with nothing, and now he thinks he can just show up and ask for an organ? Grace watched her son, this beautiful young man she'd raised alone, this boy who'd grown up without a father's guidance or love. Her heart ached for him. I haven't decided anything, she said softly. I just thought you should know. Ethan stopped pacing, his eyes finding hers. There's nothing to decide, Mom. He deserves nothing from us. Nothing. He'll die without a transplant. And where was he when you nearly died from pneumonia when I was 10? Ethan's voice broke. Where was he when you worked 2 jobs to put me through college? Where was he every single time you sat alone at my school events? Grace reached for him, but Ethan stepped back. Don't tell me you're actually considering this. His voice was quiet now, almost pleading. I don't know what I'm thinking yet, Grace admitted, but I can't simply dismiss it without reflection. Well, I can. Ethan grabbed his keys from the counter. And if you're smart, you will too. He's using you, Mom, just like he always did. The front door slammed behind him, leaving Grace alone in the suddenly silent kitchen. She sank into a chair, tears welling in her eyes. Hours later, darkness settled over the house. Grace sat on the edge of her bed, Daniel's business card balanced on her open Bible. The verses she'd tried to read blurred before her eyes. Lord, what do I do? She whispered into the quiet room. My heart says one thing, my head another. She thought of Daniel, once young and vibrant, now frail and desperate. Then Ethan's face swam before her, his righteous anger so justified, so earned. Grace picked up the card, running her thumb across the embossed letters. 20 years ago, she'd promised herself she would never again shed tears over Daniel Whitman. Yet here she was, her pillow damp beneath her cheek. Outside, a car door slammed Ethan returning home. Grace heard his footsteps, heavy with lingering anger, pass her door without pausing. "Help me find the right path," she prayed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Not what feels good, not what seems fair, but what is right. Give me wisdom beyond my own understanding." The silence offered no immediate answers, only the steady rhythm of her troubled heart. The next morning, Grace pulled back her living room curtain to find Daniel sitting on her porch steps. He looked even more diminished in daylight, shoulders hunched, his once commanding frame now a shadow of itself. He wore a cardigan despite the warm morning, and a medical alert bracelet circled his wrist. Grace's first instinct was to let the curtain fall, to pretend she hadn't seen him. But something, stubbornness or compassion, she couldn't tell which, made her sigh and head toward the kitchen. 5 minutes later, she pushed open the screen door, a mug of hot tea in each hand. "You shouldn't be sitting out here in your condition," she said, her voice neither warm nor cold. Daniel looked up, surprise crossing his gaunt face. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his cheeks had a hollow quality that hadn't been there even yesterday. "I didn't want to knock, figured I caused enough trouble." He accepted the tea with trembling hands. "Thank you." Grace settled on the step beside him, leaving careful space between them. Across the street, Mrs. Finley watered her rose bushes, eyeing them with undisguised curiosity. "How long have you been waiting?" Grace asked. "Not long. An hour, maybe." Daniel blew on his tea. "The doctor says I shouldn't skip dialysis days, but I needed to talk to you." Grace stared straight ahead. "You shouldn't skip treatment on my account. Some things matter more." He took a tentative sip. "You told him? Your son?" "Ethan. His name is Ethan." Grace's tone sharpened. "And yes, I told him. He didn't take it well. I wouldn't expect him to." Daniel's hands shook as he set the mug down. "I don't blame him." They sat in silence, broken only by the distant sound of a lawnmower and birds chattering in the maple tree that shaded her yard. The same tree Daniel had planted when they first bought the house a lifetime ago. "I tried calling my daughter last night," Daniel said finally. "Alexandra. She's 23 now. Smart girl in law school." Grace watched his profile, the unfamiliar lines of age mapped across his face. She hung up when she realized it was me. His voice cracked. "Can't say I blame her either." "What about your wife?" Grace asked, the question leaving her mouth before she could reconsider. Daniel laughed, a hollow sound that dissolved into a cough. "Melissa left 2 years ago. Found someone with better prospects, I guess." He wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. "Ironic, isn't it? The pattern repeating itself." Grace said nothing, simply watching as this man, once so proud, so self-assured, crumbled before her. "My son won't return my calls." Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "I have a 19-year-old boy who wants nothing to do with me. Both my children—" His shoulders began to shake. "Both my children despise me." Grace had imagined this moment countless times over the years, Daniel broken, regretful, alone. In her darkest hours, she'd even relished the thought, but seeing it unfold before her brought no satisfaction, only a complicated ache. "I made such a mess of everything." Daniel covered his face with his hands, tears leaking between his fingers. "My whole life one selfish decision after another. And now there's nobody but you, and I have no right to ask you for anything." Grace found herself fighting an instinct she hadn't expected, the urge to comfort him. Instead, she sat motionless, watching as 20 years of Daniel's choices caught up with him on her front porch steps. The kitchen felt too small for the three of them. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his expression hardened into something Grace had rarely seen on her son's face. Daniel sat at the table, hands folded in front of him, shoulders rounded with exhaustion. Grace stood between them, the mediator she never wanted to be. "So you show up after 20 years and what we're supposed to slice ourselves open for you?" Ethan's voice cut through the silence. Daniel raised his eyes to meet his son's. "I'm not asking for anything." "Right. You're just sitting on Mom's porch looking half dead. That's not asking at all." Ethan pushed away from the counter. "Why didn't you try your other family first? The ones you left us for?" Grace touched Ethan's arm. "Ethan—" "No, Mom. He needs to hear this." Ethan stepped closer to the table. "Do you know what it was like growing up with your shadow hanging over everything? Hearing people whisper about the man who abandoned my pregnant mother? Do you have any idea what that does to a kid?" Daniel didn't flinch. He absorbed each word, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "Every father-son baseball game, every graduation, my college acceptance letter." Ethan's voice cracked. "Where were you? With your new family? The better option?" I have no defense, Daniel said quietly. You're right about all of it. Don't do that. Ethan slammed his palm on the table. Don't act all humble and broken now. It's too late. Ethan, please. Grace stepped between them again. No, Mom. He doesn't get to waltz in here and play on your kindness. Ethan's eyes flashed. You spent 20 years picking up his pieces. You rebuilt everything he destroyed. Daniel nodded slowly. Your mother is an extraordinary woman. She did what I couldn't. Don't compliment her. Ethan's voice dropped dangerously. You lost that right when you walked out the door. The room fell silent. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by children's laughter, normal sounds from a world that kept turning while theirs stood still. I know you hate me, Daniel said finally. You should. I was a coward and a fool, and I've paid for it every day since. Not enough. Ethan shook his head. Not nearly enough. Probably not, Daniel agreed. Ethan stared at him, as if searching for something in the older man's face, some sign of the father he never knew. Finding nothing he recognized, he turned away. I can't do this. He grabbed his keys from the counter. I'm sorry, Mom. The screen door slammed behind him. Grace watched through the window as he peeled out of the driveway, tires spitting gravel. Daniel's shoulders sagged further. I should go. Finish your tea first, Grace said, though she wasn't sure why she wanted him to stay. 3 hours later, Ethan's truck pulled back into the driveway. Grace found him sitting there, engine off, staring at the house. She walked out and slid into the passenger seat. I drove all the way to the lake, he said without looking at her. Grace waited, watching his profile so like and unlike his father's. I kept thinking about what you taught me. Ethan's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. All those Sunday school lessons about forgiveness, about being better than the hurt someone caused you. Those are hard lessons, Grace said softly. I don't want to forgive him, Ethan's voice caught. But I keep thinking, what if I could save his life? What kind of person would I be if I didn't even try? Grace reached for his hand. I'm going to get tested, he whispered. Not for him. For me. For us. Because I don't want to become the kind of man who turns his back on someone dying, even if that someone is him. Grace squeezed his hand, her heart breaking and healing all at once. The hospital hallway stretched before them, its walls a pale mint green that failed to comfort. Grace walked beside Ethan, their footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm. Neither spoke. The decision had been made. At the transplant center, a nurse with kind eyes and salt and pepper hair led them to a consultation room where Dr. Rivera waited, clipboard in hand. She greeted them with a professional smile that had likely witnessed every human emotion possible. Thank you both for coming in today. Dr. Rivera gestured toward the chairs. I understand this is a complex situation. Ethan sat tall, shoulders squared. I want to get tested as a donor. Grace folded her hands in her lap, watching her son's determined profile. Dr. Rivera nodded. I appreciate your willingness, but I need to make sure you understand what's involved. Living donation isn't a simple procedure. She turned to a diagram on the wall showing 2 kidneys, their bean-shaped forms rendered in stark medical detail. The testing process is comprehensive blood work, tissue typing, cross-matching. We'll evaluate your kidney function, check for any diseases, and perform a psychological assessment. Her pen tapped against the clipboard. It's as much about protecting the donor as helping the recipient. Ethan leaned forward. And the surgery itself? Laparoscopic, in most cases. 3 to 4 small incisions. Recovery takes about 4 to 6 weeks, though many donors return to work within 2 to 3 weeks. Grace found her voice. The risks? Dr. Rivera's expression softened. As with any surgery, there are risks: infection, bleeding, blood clots. Long-term, donors live with 1 kidney, but most lead completely normal lives. Your remaining kidney compensates, functioning at about 70% of what 2 kidneys would do. Ethan nodded, absorbing each detail. When can we start? We can begin preliminary testing today if you're ready. Dr. Rivera looked between them. Any questions? 1,000 questions raced through Grace's mind, none of which the doctor could answer. Why did life circle back this way? What did God want from them? Instead, she simply shook her head. Ethan stood. I'm ready. The phlebotomist chatted easily as she filled vial after vial with Ethan's blood. 6 in total, each with different colored caps. You're a natural, she smiled. Some people can't stand the sight. Ethan watched the crimson liquid flow. I used to hate needles as a kid. Grace remembered those days holding him through vaccinations, his small body tense against hers. Look at you now, she murmured. Their eyes met across the room. Grace saw determination there, but something else too, a question. seeking her approval. She nodded slightly. Yes, I'm proud of you. 5 days passed in slow motion. Grace found herself praying more than she had in years, uncertain what outcome to hope for. Daniel remained in his motel room, waiting, his condition steadily worsening. When the call came, they returned to Dr. Rivera's office. The doctor's expression gave nothing away as she arranged papers on her desk. The results are quite conclusive, she began. Ethan, you're a compatible match for the recipient. Ethan exhaled slowly. So, I can donate? Medically speaking, yes. Your kidney is suitable, and your health is excellent. Dr. Rivera leaned forward. But I want to emphasize that you can change your mind at any point in this process. I won't. Ethan's voice held steady. Grace felt a strange heaviness settle in her chest. She should have felt relief her son could save a life. Yet as she watched Ethan schedule the pre-surgical appointments, something inside her shifted. She smiled when Ethan looked her way, but her thoughts were elsewhere on the past, on sacrifices made and unmade, on the weight of giving pieces of yourself away, on what it truly meant to be the one left behind. The hospital cafe hummed with quiet conversations and the clink of silverware. Grace wrapped her hands around a paper cup of tea that had long gone cold. Across the small table, Ethan picked at a sandwich, his mind clearly elsewhere. You've been quiet since we left Dr. Rivera's office, Ethan said. Grace watched a family a few tables over, parents coaxing a young child to eat. Life's circle, always turning. I keep thinking about when you were little. Her voice was soft. How I'd lie awake some nights wondering if I was enough. Ethan reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Mom, you were always enough. When your father left... Grace paused, surprised by how the words still caught in her throat after 20 years. When Daniel left, it felt like someone had cut me in half. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd heard fragments of the story over the years, but never the raw truth. He walked out on a Tuesday evening. Did I ever tell you that? Such an ordinary day. Grace stared into her tea. I'd made pot roast. I was wearing the blue dress he said looked nice with my eyes. She closed her eyes briefly, the memory sharp as glass. He didn't even sit down, just stood there by the door and said he'd met someone else, that he wasn't ready for a family, that he was sorry. She almost laughed. Sorry, as if that word could cover abandoning your pregnant wife. Ethan's knuckles went white around his cup. Then why are we here? Why help him at all? Grace looked up, meeting her son's eyes so like her own. Because forgiveness isn't about what the other person deserves. It's about refusing to carry the weight of bitterness. She reached for Ethan's hand. For years I thought forgiving him meant forgetting what he did. But that's not it at all. Then what is it? It's acknowledging the hurt, feeling it fully, and choosing to release it anyway. She squeezed his fingers. I spent too many years letting his absence define me. It doesn't define you, Ethan said firmly. No, but neither does this moment. Whatever we decide, it doesn't erase the past or guarantee the future. They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe noise fading around them. What I've learned, Grace continued, is that peace comes from making choices you can live with, not choices that please others or even make sense to them. Ethan studied her face. You don't want me to do this, do you? I want you to be free to make your own choice. She straightened her shoulders. But I also want to be free to make mine. Something shifted in her eyes, a quiet resolve taking shape. You've never had a father, Grace said, and that's not your fault or your burden to fix. Mom, no, listen to me. Her voice grew stronger. You have your whole life ahead of you, a career, maybe a family someday. So do you. Grace smiled, touching his cheek. I've had my life, Ethan, a beautiful one because of you. In that moment, watching her son, this miracle she'd raised alone, this man of integrity and compassion, Grace felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in years. The decision crystallized within her, settling into place like a key turning in a lock. She would be the one to give Daniel a kidney, not out of obligation or guilt, but as an act of grace for herself as much as for him. A final release of the past, a closing of the circle. I think, she said quietly, I need to talk to Dr. Rivera again. Grace entered the hospital through the east entrance, away from the wing where Daniel received his dialysis treatments. She'd chosen the early morning appointment deliberately, knowing Ethan would be at work. The weight of secrecy felt strange. She rarely kept anything from her son. But this decision needed to be hers alone first. Mrs. Whitman? The nurse smiled, clipboard in hand. We're ready for you. The testing process was more extensive than Grace had imagined. Blood draws, urine samples, EKG, chest x-ray, each procedure bringing her one step closer to a decision that had kept her awake for nights. "The doctor will go over all the risks with you," the technician explained as she drew another vial of blood. "Donation is serious surgery." Grace nodded. "I understand. But did she?" The question followed her home, lingered as she prepared dinner, echoed as she prayed that night. Not about whether she should do it that much felt clear, but about what it meant to give part of herself to the man who had walked away. 3 days later, the preliminary results confirmed what she suspected. She was a potential match. Daniel sat in the hospital courtyard, a thin blanket across his legs despite the mild day. Dialysis always left him cold and tired. He didn't notice Grace until she sat beside him. "The doctors say you're getting weaker," she said. He didn't look up. "They don't sugarcoat things anymore, not at my age." "Ethan's a match," Grace said, watching a bird hop along the concrete path. "But I'm getting tested too." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" "I'm getting tested," she repeated. "My initial results look promising." His face crumpled, the careful mask of indifference falling away. "Why would you do that? After everything?" "That's not the question, Daniel." She finally looked at him, really looked at the man she'd once built dreams around. Gray had replaced the dark brown she remembered, lines mapped his face, but his eyes, they were the same, just hollowed by regret. "What is the question then?" His voice barely carried. "Whether I can live with myself if I don't." She smoothed her skirt. "I've spent 20 years rebuilding a life you shattered. This is how I close that chapter, not for you, but for me." Daniel's hands trembled as he pulled the blanket tighter. "I don't deserve it." "No," Grace agreed. "You don't." A tear slid down his weathered cheek. "I'm sorry, Grace. God, I'm so sorry." She nodded, standing to leave. "I know." Ethan found the paperwork while helping Grace file some insurance documents. "Living donor evaluation" stood out in bold letters at the top of the page. "Mom?" His voice cracked. "What is this?" Grace set down her coffee cup. "I was going to tell you tonight. You're getting tested?" "For him?" Confusion, then understanding dawned on his face. "Not tested, you've already been tested." "I'm a match," she confirmed quietly. "The surgery is scheduled for next month." "No." Ethan shook his head. "I'm the match. I already decided. I know you did, because you're a good man." Her voice swelled with pride. "The kind of man I raised you to be. But this isn't your burden to carry." "It's not yours either. It's my choice," she corrected gently. "The last 20 years happened to both of us, but in different ways. This is my journey to complete." Ethan sank into the chair beside her, the paperwork still clutched in his hand. The anger he expected didn't come instead. A profound respect filled his chest, making it hard to speak. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he finally whispered. Grace smiled, touching his cheek. "I learned it from raising you." The waiting room clock ticked past hour 5 of the surgery. Ethan paced the small area, his coffee long cold, his prayers a constant whisper. The room felt smaller with each passing minute. "Family of Daniel Whitman?" A surgeon in blue scrubs appeared, mask pulled down around his neck. Ethan stepped forward. "How is he? How's my mother?" "Mr. Whitman's surgery went well. The kidney is functioning, and his vitals are stable." The doctor's expression remained neutral. "He's in recovery now." Relief loosened the knot in Ethan's chest, but only for a moment. The doctor hadn't mentioned Grace. "And my mother? Grace Whitman?" The surgeon's eyes flickered down, then back up. "We're still working on stabilizing her. There were complications." "What kind of complications?" Ethan's voice sharpened. "She experienced unexpected bleeding during the procedure. Her blood pressure dropped significantly." The surgeon placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "The team is doing everything they can." Ethan sank into the nearest chair, the room tilting around him. "This can't be happening. I'll update you as soon as I know more." The surgeon disappeared through the double doors, leaving Ethan alone with his fear. 2 more hours passed. Ethan called his grandparents, his voice hollow as he explained the situation. Several church members arrived, forming a prayer circle in the corner of the waiting room. Their whispered appeals to heaven provided background to Ethan's silent vigil. When the doors opened again, a different doctor approached. Her face showed the weariness of a long battle. "Mr. Whitman's son?" Ethan stood on shaky legs. "Yes, my mother. We've managed to control the bleeding, but she's lost a significant amount of blood. We've moved her to the ICU. Will she—" The question caught in his throat. "The next 24 hours are critical." The doctor's tone softened. "Your mother is fighting hard, but her condition is serious. Can I see her?" "Briefly. She's heavily sedated." The ICU was a landscape of beeping monitors and hushed voices. Grace lay still, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that tracked her fragile hold on life. Her skin was pale, almost translucent against the white sheets. Ethan approached slowly, as if afraid his presence might disturb the delicate balance keeping her alive. He took her hand, the one without the IV, and held it between both of his. "Mom," he whispered, "I need you to fight. Please." Her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, the ventilator breathing for her. There was no response, no flicker of recognition, just the steady electronic heartbeat on the monitor. A nurse touched his elbow gently. "Talk to her, she might hear you." Ethan nodded, leaning closer. "Remember when I was 10 and fell out of the Johnson's apple tree? You said I scared 10 years off your life." His voice cracked. "Well, you're scaring 20 off mine right now. So you have to get better, okay? You have to come back." The monitors beeped in unchanging rhythm. In a different recovery room, Daniel opened his eyes groggily. A nurse adjusted his IV. "The surgery went well," she told him with a smile. "Your new kidney is already working." "Grace?" he asked, his voice rough. "How is she?" The nurse's smile faltered. "Try to rest. The doctor will be in shortly." Something in her tone sent ice through Daniel's veins. He tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. "Tell me, please." "She's in intensive care. There were complications." Daniel closed his eyes, a tear escaping down his temple. The gift of life Grace had given him suddenly felt like the heaviest burden he'd ever carried. Night settled over the hospital. The fluorescent lights of the ICU buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow. Ethan sat beside Grace's bed, her hand clasped between his thumb tracing slow circles over her knuckles. His eyes burned from exhaustion, but he refused to close them, afraid of what might happen if he looked away, even for a moment. "You always told me God has perfect timing," Ethan whispered. "But I'm telling you, Mom, this isn't it. Not yet." The ventilator hissed rhythmically. Grace's chest rose and fell in mechanical precision, her face peaceful despite the tubes and wires surrounding her. A nurse had brushed her hair earlier, arranging it neatly on the pillow, a small gesture of dignity amid the clinical chaos. In the corner of the room, Daniel sat hunched in a plastic chair, his hospital gown hanging loosely on his frame. The surgical incision across his abdomen throbbed, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight crushing his chest. He watched Ethan's devotion with a mixture of awe and crushing shame. This was his fault, all of it. "Our Father who art in heaven," Ethan began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. He'd been praying for hours, cycling through memorized prayers when his own words failed him. "Hallowed be thy name." Daniel bowed his head, mouthing the words silently. He couldn't remember the last time he'd prayed. Years, decades, maybe. A doctor entered, checking Grace's vitals with practiced efficiency. "Her blood pressure is stabilizing," he said, making notes on his chart. "That's a positive sign." Ethan looked up, hope flaring in his eyes. "When will she wake up?" "Hard to say. Her body's been through significant trauma." The doctor offered a cautious smile. "But she's fighting." "She's always been a fighter," Ethan said. "Raised me on her own, worked 2 jobs, never complained." The doctor nodded and left. Silence settled over the room again, broken only by the steady beep of the heart monitor and the ventilator's mechanical breath. "You should rest," Daniel said finally, his voice rough. "I can watch her." Ethan didn't look at him. "I'm not leaving." "You need sleep, Ethan. What I need is my mother." The words came out sharp, edged with exhaustion and fear. Daniel fell silent. What right did he have to offer advice? He'd abdicated that privilege 20 years ago. "I never thanked her," he said, after a long pause. "For anything." Ethan continued praying, pretending not to hear. "I ran away from responsibility, from love, from everything that mattered." Daniel's voice cracked. "And now she might die because of me." "Don't." Ethan finally turned to face him. "Don't make her sacrifice about your guilt." Daniel flinched as if struck. "You're right. I'm sorry." The heart monitor beeped steady, unchanging. Outside, dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the blinds. Another day Grace might not see. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Mom used to sing this hymn when I was scared. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see." His voice broke. "I need to see those mercies now, Mom. I need you to wake up." The only response was the steady rhythm of machines keeping her alive. Daniel watched from his corner, witnessing the love between mother and son, a bond forged in his absence, strengthened by his betrayal. The monitors continued their digital vigil, marking each heartbeat, each breath. Grace remained still, lost in the silent depths of her body's battle. The heart monitor beeped on. The nurses had finally convinced Ethan to go to the cafeteria for something to eat. Daniel watched his son's reluctant departure, shoulders slumped with exhaustion, before turning back to Grace's still form. For the first time, they were alone. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, wincing at the pull of stitches across his abdomen. He wheeled himself closer to her bedside, the IV pole trailing beside him. Outside, rain began to tap against the window, a gentle percussion accompanying the steady beep of monitors. "I don't know if you can hear me," Daniel began, his voice barely above a whisper. He cleared his throat. "The doctors say sometimes people can." Grace remained motionless, her chest rising and falling with each mechanical breath. Daniel reached for her hand, hesitating before gently taking it in his. Her skin felt cool against his palm. "I need to tell you something, Grace. Something I should have said 20 years ago." The monitors beeped steadily. "I didn't leave because of you." His voice cracked. "I told myself it was about feeling trapped, about wanting freedom. But that was a lie." Daniel looked down at their hands, his weathered and spotted with age, hers still graceful despite the IV taped to her wrist. "I left because I was terrified." The confession hung in the air. "Terrified of failing you. Failing our baby. My father was cold, distant. I never knew how to be anything different." A tear slid down his cheek, landing on their joined hands. "The day you told me you were pregnant, I panicked. What if I couldn't love our child? What if I turned into my father? So I ran. Found someone who didn't expect me to be a father, who didn't look at me with all that hope in her eyes." The rain fell harder outside, drops streaming down the window like tears. "It was the most selfish thing I've ever done, and I've spent 20 years trying to convince myself it was the right choice." Daniel's shoulders shook. "But the truth is, I've been empty since the day I walked out. Nothing filled that hole. Not success. Not my second marriage. Nothing." He brushed his thumb across her knuckles, remembering how these hands had once cradled his face, wiped away his tears during better days. "You deserve so much better than me, Grace. And yet here you are, giving me life when I gave you nothing but pain." A soft noise at the door made Daniel turn. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, a coffee cup clutched in his hand, his expression unreadable. How long had he been standing there? Daniel straightened, quickly wiping his eyes. "I thought you were getting food." "I was." Ethan held up the coffee. "Forgot Mom's lip balm. The nurses said her lips might get dry." The simple act of care, so automatic for Ethan, so foreign to Daniel, made his chest ache. He started to pull his hand away from Grace's, but Ethan shook his head. "You don't have to stop." Daniel blinked in surprise as Ethan walked to the other side of the bed. He set the coffee down and carefully applied the balm to Grace's lips. "She could always see the good in people," Ethan said quietly, "even when they couldn't see it themselves." Their eyes met across Grace's bed, a moment of fragile understanding passing between them. "She taught me that," Ethan added, a hint of his anger softening. "It's just taking me longer to learn it than her." Daniel nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A small crack in the wall between them, allowing in the first faint light of possibility. The silence settled between them, not comfortable, but no longer charged with hostility. Ethan pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. For several minutes, the only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the gentle patter of rain against the window. "She used to tell me stories about you," Ethan said suddenly, "when I was little." Daniel looked up, startled. "She did?" "Not many, but sometimes." Ethan's fingers drummed against the armrest. "She told me how you fixed her car once when it broke down in the rain. How you danced with her in the kitchen when your song came on the radio." Daniel's breath caught. He remembered that moment, Grace laughing, as he twirled her around their tiny kitchen, her hair catching the late afternoon sunlight. "She never wanted me to hate you," Ethan continued. "Even when I got older and figured things out, she never encouraged it." His voice tightened. "That was all me. You had every right, maybe." Ethan's gaze returned to his mother. "But she wouldn't want it. That's not who she island." A nurse entered to check Grace's vitals, moving efficiently around them. She adjusted something on one of the machines and made a note on her clipboard. "Her numbers are improving," she said with an encouraging smile. "Dr. Mercer will be in shortly." After she left, Daniel shifted in his seat, wincing at the pull of his stitches. "You should rest," Ethan said, noticing his discomfort. "You just had major surgery too." "I'm not leaving her." Ethan nodded, seeming to understand. Another fragile thread connecting them. "I never thanked you," Daniel said quietly. "For what?" "For considering donation before your mother stepped in. You didn't owe me that." Ethan looked down at his hands. "I didn't do it for you." "I know, but still." Daniel paused. You're a good man, Ethan. Better than I ever was. Mom did that, Ethan said, his voice steady. She raised me to be the kind of person who'd help someone in need, even if... He trailed off. Even if they don't deserve it, Daniel finished. The doctor arrived then, reviewing Grace's chart with focused attention. He checked her pupils with a small light, then listened to her heart and lungs. She's responding well, he said finally. The sedation should be wearing off soon. Keep talking to her familiar voices can help. After he left, Ethan leaned closer to his mother. Mom, he said softly, can you hear me? The doctor says you're doing better. No response. Remember how you always said God works in mysterious ways? Ethan continued, his voice thick with emotion. I think I'm starting to understand what you meant. Daniel watched his son, this stranger, who carried his blood but none of his flaws, and felt a profound sense of loss for all the years he'd missed. Suddenly, Grace's fingers twitched against Ethan's palm. Mom? Ethan leaned forward, hope lighting his face. Mom, can you hear me? Her eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. For a moment she seemed confused, blinking against the harsh hospital lighting. Ethan, she whispered, her voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier. I'm here, Mom. Tears filled Ethan's eyes as she squeezed his hand weakly. Thank you, she whispered, for being here. Her gaze shifted, focusing with effort until she found Daniel sitting on her other side. Their eyes met across the small distance, a space once filled with betrayal and pain, now holding something different, something quieter. You're both here, she said, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Daniel couldn't speak. In her tired but forgiving eyes, he saw not just the woman he had wounded, but the woman who had somehow found the strength to save him anyway. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting stripes of golden light across Grace's hospital bed. She adjusted herself against the pillows, grimacing slightly at the pull of stitches. Let me help you. Daniel stepped forward from where he'd been hovering near the doorway. Grace hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. His hands were gentle as he rearranged the pillows behind her back. The touch felt strange, familiar, yet foreign, like encountering a long-forgotten photograph. 20 years had weathered him. Deep lines framed his eyes, and his once confident posture now curved slightly inward. Is that better? He asked, stepping back. Yes. She settled against the support. The doctor says I might go home next week if everything continues healing well. Daniel nodded, moving toward the small table where a pitcher of water Saturday. Would you like some water? Please. He poured carefully, hands steadier than they'd been days ago. The kidney was working his body, accepting her gift in ways his heart had never accepted her love. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Ethan said he'd be back after his shift ends, Daniel said, handing her the cup. Grace took a small sip. He's been working too hard, trying to balance everything. He's strong, like his mother. The compliment hung between them, simple but sincere, different from the hollow flattery he'd once used to smooth over arguments. Grace gestured toward the small Bible on her nightstand. Would you mind reading something? My eyes get tired so quickly. Daniel looked surprised, but reached for the worn book. Any particular passage? Psalms, maybe 103. He found the page and cleared his throat. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name, he began, voice uncertain at first, then steadying. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits, who forgives all your iniquity, who heals all your diseases. As he read, Grace watched him. The words seemed to affect him differently now, not just sounds, but meanings that penetrated the armor he'd worn for decades. His voice caught slightly at, as far as the east is from the west, so far does he remove our transgressions from us. When he finished, he closed the Bible carefully, almost reverently. I haven't read that in years, he admitted. It was always one of my favorites, Grace said, especially during the hardest times. After I left, she nodded. And when Mom died, and when Ethan broke his arm falling from the treehouse. I didn't know he broke his arm. You missed a lot of broken things, she said simply, without accusation. Daniel's shoulders slumped. Yes. Outside in the corridor, a meal cart rattled past. A child's laughter floated from somewhere down the hall. I always thought I needed to be perfect, Daniel said suddenly. That if I showed any weakness, I'd be worthless. Grace listened, her eyes tired but attentive. I was wrong about so many things, he continued. I've been wrong my whole life. Grace reached for her water again, and Daniel moved to help steady her hand. None of us gets everything right, she said softly. That's why forgiveness matters. As evening approached, fatigue crept over Grace. Her eyelids grew heavy as Daniel adjusted her blanket. I should let you rest, he said. Thank you for staying today, she murmured, already drifting. As sleep claimed her, she felt a tentative hand briefly touch hers. The gesture was small but honest, like the first green shoot after a hard winter. In her heart, Grace knew that while forgiveness couldn't undo the past, it could still rewrite the future. Even the most hardened hearts could change, given time and grace enough to heal. Shadows lengthened across the hospital parking lot as Ethan walked toward his car. The weight of the past week, his mother's surgery, the constant worry, the hospital's antiseptic smell pressed down on his shoulders. Ethan. He turned to find Daniel standing a few yards away, hands shoved deep in his pockets. The older man looked small against the sprawling hospital building behind him. I was just heading out, Ethan said, keys jingling in his hand. Could we talk? Just for a minute. Daniel's voice carried none of the confidence Ethan remembered from that birthday party years ago. Ethan checked his watch, then nodded toward a small courtyard with benches near the parking area. 5 minutes. They sat on opposite ends of a bench. Evening birds called from nearby trees while medical staff and scrubs hurried past. Neither spoke immediately, the silence stretching between them like a physical thing. Your mother's doing better, Daniel finally said. Yes. Ethan's response was clipped. Daniel rubbed his palms against his knees. I never thanked you. For what? For protecting her all these years. He looked up at the darkening sky. For being the man I never was. Ethan's jaw tightened. Someone had to be. I know. Daniel nodded. I know that now. A nurse walked by, offering a tired smile. When she passed, Daniel turned slightly toward Ethan. I was never the father you deserved, he said. Not even for a day. The words hung in the air, honest and bare. Ethan studied his father's face, the familiar shape of the nose, the set of the jaw that he sometimes caught in his own reflection. No, you weren't. I missed everything. Your first steps, school, graduation. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. I told myself it was better that way, that you wouldn't want me around. But that was just another lie I used to sleep at night. Ethan thought of all the father-son campouts he'd attended with his friend's dad. All the baseball games where he'd searched the stands for a face that was never there. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Because your mother gave me more than a kidney. Daniel's eyes were red-rimmed. She gave me a chance to face what I've done, and what I've missed. A hospital helicopter passed overhead, its rhythmic thumping filling the silence. I don't expect you to forgive me, Daniel continued. I wouldn't, in your shoes. But I wanted you to know that I see you, Ethan, the good man you've become, and that had nothing to do with me, but everything to do with her. Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first crack in a wall he'd built long ago. She never said a bad word about you, Ethan said. Not once, even when I was angry and wanted her to be angry too. That sounds like Grace. Ethan stood, keys still clutched in his hand. I need to get some things from home for her. Daniel nodded and rose slowly, his movements careful, still recovering himself. I'll be here when you get back, he said. If that's okay. Ethan hesitated, then extended his hand. I'll bring back dinner. Hospital food is terrible. Daniel looked at the offered hand with surprise. He took it, the handshake awkward but firm, not reconciliation, not yet, but something like a start. Thank you, Daniel said, understanding the gesture for what it was. Not forgiveness, but possibility. Ethan nodded once and walked toward his car, feeling oddly lighter than he had in days. Ethan carefully guided the wheelchair down the hospital ramp, while Grace protested mildly. I can walk just fine, she insisted, though the color hadn't fully returned to her cheeks. Hospital policy, Mom. Humor them. The automatic doors slid open to reveal a small crowd gathered in the parking lot, women from Grace's Bible study, neighbors clutching balloons, and Pastor Mike holding a handmade sign that read, Welcome home, Grace! Their cheers erupted as she appeared. Oh my goodness, Grace whispered, pressing a hand to her mouth. Martha from next door rushed forward, her gray curls bouncing. We've got your house already, dear. Fresh sheets, clean floors, and enough food to feed an army. Behind her, others nodded eagerly. Grace's friend Susan stepped up with a bouquet of yellow daisies, Grace's favorite. You gave us quite a scare, Susan said, leaning down to embrace her gently. Ethan helped his mother stand, supporting her elbow as she accepted hugs and well wishes. The love surrounding them was palpable, a testament to the life Grace had built during those long years alone. We've set up a schedule, Pastor Mike explained, showing Grace a printed calendar. Someone will be checking in on you every day for the next 2 weeks. No arguments. Grace smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. You all didn't have to. Hush now, Martha interrupted. After all you've done for everyone else, this is the least we can do. The group moved toward Ethan's car, where more surprises waited, handmade cards from the church children, a quilt stitched with prayers, and casserole dishes stacked neatly in coolers. At the edge of the gathering, almost invisible against the shadow of a large oak tree, stood Daniel. He watched the scene unfold, hands in his pockets, uncertain and out of place. His presence was noted with curious glances, and a few furrowed brows most knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. Grace spotted him as Ethan helped her into the passenger seat. Their eyes met across the distance. Daniel offered a small, hesitant nod, then turned as if to leave. "Daniel," Grace called, her voice carrying over the chatter. The group fell silent, all eyes turning first to Grace, then to the man who had once broken her heart. The tension in the air thickened. "Would you like to join us?" Grace asked. Daniel froze, clearly surprised by the invitation. "I don't want to intrude on your homecoming." Pastor Mike and Susan exchanged glances. Ethan, standing by the driver's door, studied his mother's face, understanding her better than anyone. "It's okay," Grace said, addressing not just Daniel but everyone present. "Please." The silence stretched uncomfortable seconds longer before Martha broke it with a decisive clap of her hands. "Well, the more the merrier. You can help carry these casseroles." Daniel stepped forward cautiously, like a man crossing thin ice. He accepted a dish from Martha, nodding his thanks. As the small procession prepared to leave for Grace's home, she caught Daniel's eye again and smiled, not the smile of a woman forgetting past hurts, but of one choosing to move beyond them. She extended her hand in a gesture that invited him into the circle around her. Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly as he moved closer to the group. The wall that had separated him from Grace's world hadn't fallen completely, but a door had opened one Grace herself had unlocked. "Let's go home," she said quietly, her gaze encompassing everyone, including Daniel. The kitchen timer chimed just as Grace adjusted the centerpiece, a simple arrangement of autumn flowers gathered from her backyard. Through the window, golden late-afternoon sunlight bathed her dining room in warmth, catching the edges of her best china plates, arranged carefully around the table. "Need any help in there?" Ethan called from the living room. "Just about done," Grace answered, removing her apron. The scent of pot roast filled the house, mingling with apple pie cooling on the windowsill. Her hands no longer trembled when she lifted heavy dishes, and the incision from her surgery had faded to a thin pink line. The doctors called her recovery remarkable. Grace called it something else, a blessing. The doorbell rang, and she heard Ethan greeting her parents. Her father's booming laugh mixed with her mother's gentle voice, sounds that had anchored Grace through every storm of her life. "There she is," her father said when Grace appeared in the doorway. His embrace was careful but firm. "You look wonderful, sweetheart." Her mother pressed a cheek against hers. "Better than wonderful, you're glowing." Pastor Mike and Susan arrived next, bearing dinner rolls and salad. Martha bustled in right behind them, with extra napkins she insisted Grace would need. The house filled with chatter and laughter, the kind of noise that transforms a building into a home. When the doorbell rang again, a brief hush fell over the room. Ethan moved to answer it, exchanging a glance with Grace. Daniel stood on the porch, holding a small bouquet of mixed flowers and looking more at ease than Grace had seen him in decades. The new kidney functioning inside him had restored color to his face and strength to his step. "Come in," Ethan said, stepping aside without hesitation. Grace watched as her parents nodded politely to Daniel. There was history there, painful history, but today wasn't about reopening old wounds. It was about acknowledging that healing, however slow and imperfect, was possible. "These are for you," Daniel said, handing the flowers to Grace. "From my garden. I started planting after the hospital." "They're beautiful," she replied, genuinely touched that he'd found a hobby that created rather than consumed. When they gathered around the table, Grace remained standing a moment longer, looking at the faces surrounding her, some who had stood by her always, others who had found their way back. She felt a fullness in her chest that had nothing to do with her surgery. "Before we eat," she said softly, "I want to thank you all for being here. Life doesn't always give us what we expect, but sometimes it gives us exactly what we need." Her father reached for her mother's hand. Susan dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Daniel looked down at his plate, humbled. "Let's eat," Grace said, picking up the carving knife. The evening flowed naturally, conversation passing around the table like the dishes they shared. Grace noticed how Ethan occasionally included Daniel in discussions about his work, careful steps toward something neither had expected to build. As she sliced the pie later, Grace paused in the doorway between kitchen and dining room. Daniel had just said something about his first attempt at gardening, describing how he'd accidentally planted flowers upside down. Ethan's laugh was genuine, his shoulders relaxed. Grace felt tears gather, not the bitter ones she'd shed alone so many nights, but tears of pure gratitude. The sight of her son and his father sharing even this small moment of connection was more healing than any medicine. The journey wasn't over. There were still wounds that would never completely disappear. But watching them now, Grace knew with absolute certainty that the miracle wasn't just in her physical recovery, it was in the hearts around her table, slowly finding their way toward forgiveness, disappear, boundaries that would remain firm. Daniel would never again be her husband, but perhaps, in time, he might earn the title of friend. As the evening wound down, Pastor Mike led them in a prayer of thanksgiving. Grace's mother insisted on helping with the dishes, while her father settled into the armchair, sharing stories with Martha about their youth. The comfortable hum of conversation filled every corner of the house. Grace slipped outside to the back porch, wrapping a light cardigan around her shoulders. The autumn air carried a gentle chill, but she welcomed the freshness against her skin. Stars had begun to appear in the darkening sky, pinpricks of light against deepening blue. She lowered herself carefully onto the porch swing, its familiar creak a soundtrack to countless quiet evenings. From inside, Ethan's laugh rang out clear and unguarded. Daniel must have said something amusing again. The sound warmed Grace more than any sweater could. 20 years ago, she had sat on this very swing, a newborn Ethan cradled against her chest, wondering how she would manage alone. The weight of abandonment had pressed down on her shoulders then, threatening to crush her spirit. But somehow, one day at a time, she had found her way forward. Now, looking up at the vast night sky, Grace understood something she couldn't have grasped during those dark days. The journey itself, with all its pain and unexpected turns, had shaped her into someone stronger than she ever imagined becoming. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carried away on the night breeze. Not a formal prayer, just the overflow of a grateful heart. The screen door creaked open behind her. "Mom?" Ethan stepped onto the porch. "Everything okay?" Grace patted the space beside her. "Just getting some fresh air? Join me?" He settled next to her, the swing rocking gently beneath their weight. For a few moments they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars brighten against the darkening sky. "I never thought I'd see the day," Ethan finally said, his voice low. "Him sitting at our table." "Life has a way of surprising us," Grace replied. "You taught me about forgiveness my whole life," Ethan said, "but watching you live it out, that's different." Grace reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about not letting it poison your future. Inside, someone put on music, one of Grace's old gospel records. The melody drifted through the open window, familiar and soothing. "Are you happy, Mom?" Ethan asked, turning to study her face in the dim porch light. Grace considered the question, not with the rushed assurance she might have given in years past, but with honest reflection. "I'm at peace," she answered, "which might be even better than happy." Another burst of laughter floated from inside her father's this time, followed by Daniel's quieter chuckle. Grace closed her eyes, letting the night embrace her. Her story had come full circle in ways she never could have predicted. The greatest miracle wasn't the kidney she'd given, or even her own recovery. It was this, the healing of hearts once thought beyond repair. She opened her eyes to the stars above, countless points of light in the darkness, like the promise she'd clung to all these years that even in the deepest night, Grace would find a way to shine through. If you enjoyed the story of Charles Whitmore, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. If you enjoyed the story of Charles Grace Whitman, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.